So I've recently gotten into knitting, and because I know knitting and the book community has a lot of overlap, a lot of people do both. And I've been talking a lot about getting offline and doing more things offline and consuming less, and that also includes things like clothes. I'm not a big shopper actually, but I do have a lot of interest in like making my own clothes, sewing, knitting, all of these things. So as of like less than a month ago, at the time of me filming this, I have started knitting. And I thought it'd be fun as someone who is brand new to knitting to chat a little bit with you about knitting, because I'm finding getting into the world of fiber arts as someone who's never been into it incredibly fascinating. And I also think it'd be fun to go back and watch this video later, like maybe even next year or something, and see what has changed, what like I didn't know, whatever. But yeah, it's been a lot. It's been a fascinating excursion. So I have a friend who's been knitting since she was like 14, and she was like, I will teach you how to knit. So I went over to her place a couple weeks ago, and I got a set of circular needles. She showed me how to cast on and do knits and purl stitches. So for those of you that don't like know anything about knitting, I will try to give a little bit of background because that's part of something that I've encountered now. There's so many knitting channels out there, and there are channels that definitely do like step-by-step tutorial things, and then ones just kind of like talk about their knitting. And there's so many words and so many terms and so many things that you just have to learn kind of by immersion. So most people think about, because a friend just gave me these so I can actually show you. Most people think about knitting and they think about like a straight needle, which is this. I have been knitting, besides these that I got from a friend who just like gave them to me. I've been knitting on circular needles, which is needles that have, I'm not going to take off my project, but there's two needles on the end that you can screw on and off on interchangeables. Not all of them are interchangeable. Some are fixed, which means you can't screw the needles on and off. And then there's a cable in between. This is really helpful for knitting in the round, which is what I'm doing here because I'm knitting a hat. But you can also knit flat like you do with straight needles on circular needles if you want to. I know. All of that information was a lot, and that's not even the tip of the iceberg. My friend showed me the long tail cast on, which is one of many varieties of casting on. Casting on is just basically getting your yarn on needles, that first row. And then how to do the knit and the purl stitch. Those are just the two kinds of stitches that you have in knitting, and then basically everything, as far as what I've been told, is just a like adaptation of the knit and purl stitch in various different ways. So in that way, I've heard that knitting is kind of easier to scale up because you only need to learn those two stitches and then you just do that in a variety of different ways. Crocheting is easier to start, but then scaling up is harder, supposedly. I'm sure that's different for everybody. And that's a thing that I'm going to get into as well, because again, the world of the fiber arts is so wild. So I did just basically get a ball of yarn, and I got a worsted weight yarn, which is kind of like a, I don't know, like a medium basically. There's different varieties, different sizes and gauges of yarn as far as like thickness and things. And so I was recommended get a size 8 needle and get this like worsted or Aran weight yarn, which is just like not super bulky, but also not super skinny and overwhelming. And I just basically over and over just knitted rows of purl and knit stitch to make stockinette stitch, which is a kind of stitch. I'm realizing that if anyone's watching this that isn't into knitting, they're gonna be like, what are you talking about? And that's exactly how I felt. So I just did that over and over again, and then just kept like unwinding my stuff and restarting because I was figuring out a lot of like errors that I was doing. And then once I started getting pretty good at that, I made just like a little swatch. So this is just like some of my knitting, not doing anything, right? So like you can tell that I fucked up. I think this is the bind off. When you take the stuff off the needles, it's called a bind off, or I think people also call it casting off, whatever. But you can tell that I like messed some things up. This was now a few weeks ago since I've done this. And so this is my little like swatch of how my stuff looked. And honestly, for a beginner, there's a couple gaps in here. Like you can tell I dropped a stitch here. But otherwise, she's not bad. She's really not bad. So that's my little like first gauge swatch that I'm keeping. So yeah, I did that over and over for like a week or so. And then I've been looking at all the local yarn stores, and there was a beginner sock knitting class, which I'm currently in. As of filming this, I've done the first 2 classes out of 4. And some people might say, oh my God, you're already knitting socks. It's a beginner sock class. And I will say that of the 5 of us, 3 of those people do not seem like beginners. One girl always does test knitting, which is basically like testing new patterns for people who are designers who are like, hey, I'm doing a test knit. They just kind of like tell the community, and then people get to kind of volunteer, and then they kind of get to read the pattern and tell the designer. It's kind of like editing for knitting patterns. So she does a lot of test knitting, which means she's good, right? So I am knitting these socks. And so this is as far as we've gotten. So we're knitting on little 10-inch circulars, which is what these guys are, right? Because it's a sock. And so this is the leg of the sock so far. And this is actually inside out. I think we actually turn it right side out when we're done. But anyway, that's that. And then this is the first part of the heel. So yeah, I'm knitting a sock. And then I've already started the second sock because I've heard the curse of if you start knitting socks, you finish the first sock and then you don't want to do the second sock. And I don't want that to happen to me. So I'm starting the second sock. And also so I can practice the things that I'm learning like right after I did it so it can hopefully get solidified in my brain more. So I'm a very ambitious beginner. I am knitting because I want to knit colorwork sweaters. For those of you that don't know, sweaters look like this. It's sweaters with like patterns and designs on them. This is not necessarily hard, it's just slightly more complicated. So my plan right now is I'm knitting those socks for this class, which will be done in 2 more weeks. And then I'm also knitting a hat right now. It's a Pearl Soho hat. It's gonna look like this. I'm knitting it in the baby size though, because what I think I'm gonna do for a little bit is practice garments in smaller sizes so that I can kind of like go through and learn things and learn like construction. So the reason I signed up for the sock class is I was like, that'll teach me some things and it will get me in front of a teacher who, when I mess up, because I was messing up something with my knitting, I basically wasn't putting my string forward and behind and whatever for purl versus knit stitches. And so it was creating weird stuff on my needles. And so having someone there to be like, what did I do? And they could fix it and tell me what I did has helped a lot so far. So I basically wanted a teacher to be able to show me like what I was doing when I was doing it. My friend can do that a little bit, but it's just easier to have like a teacher. And learning something like socks where you have to do like decreases and different things. So after this and after I do my hat, which is also some stuff with like decreases and whatever, I am going to probably do a color work hat to start learning color work and maybe start doing some sweaters that are baby sweaters. Now, I don't know any babies. I know no one with kids that I'm like close enough to like knit a sweater for. However, I saw someone post on Reddit about how like when they first started learning garment making, they made it in little kid sizes because then they could have the like, I'm going through and doing something, but it's smaller, so it's not taking as long, but I'm learning things like how to do a sleeve and how to do a collar and how to do increases and decreases and whatever on a smaller garment. And especially because I'm a slower knitter, I want to do that. So that's kind of my game plan. A couple things that if you're a knitter, you might want to know. I like metal needles. I like the way they sound. They are just so, can you see? It's just so nice. I like the way that metal needles sound more than wood. And I like it to be a little more slippery because right now I am a like tighter knitter and I do find the slip to be better for me on the metal than the wood. I do like an interchangeable circular needle. I am asking for a set for Christmas because right now I'm a little bit frustrated that like every time I look at a new project, I need to like go buy a different size needle or whatever. But I am going to have like a full set hopefully after Christmas. Now, I actually have some things to say that I think are a little bit spicier that I'm not going to put here. I'm going to put in a separate video on the Bibliothecary, link down below for those of you that are interested, because there are some things about the knitting community that, unlike the fiber arts community, that's kind of spicy and that I was not expecting. It's a more toxic community than I was expecting. I haven't been involved in it. It's just like what I've seen on other creators' pages, other people talking about. There's a lot of drama. If you thought the book community had a lot of drama, it doesn't hold a candle to the knitting community and the fiber arts community. It's crazy. So yeah, I want to talk a little bit about that. One of the things that I will say that's a little bit shady that I don't understand, but maybe one of you will be able to tell me, is a lot of knitting, almost every knitting channel that I've watched, calls their channel a podcast. Now, it's not a podcast. I don't know where this came from and why they all refer to videos they make as podcasts, because by definition, a podcast is an audio recording. Now, some people do obviously record podcasts and put them on YouTube and record video to go along with it, but that's technically a separate thing. A podcast is audio. These knitting videos can't be a podcast because they're showing finished objects, they're showing things that they're knitting, and it requires a visual component. All of them refer to it as a knitting podcast though. And they specifically refer to a knitting podcast as when you're like, I'm pretty sure it's like when you're updating on like what you're making and stuff. And I'm like, that is not a podcast. And why are you guys calling it a podcast? I don't know, but it is something that like, as someone who's watched YouTube for a very long time and also listens to podcasts, like actual audio podcasts, I'm like, why does the entire knitting community refer to this as a knitting podcast? It's not. Anyway, that is probably the lightest of my complaints. If any of you have like a explanation for why all of them refer to it as a knitting podcast, let me know. But yeah, that's probably the least shady thing that I want to say about knitting stuff. So yeah, the other video will be linked down below for you to watch if you're interested. But yeah, as far as other things that I feel like are relevant to know, I am trying to be a more, not quite monogamous knitter. People call it monogamous knitter versus having lots of works in progress or WIPs. A lot of people will cast on multiple things and have multiple projects going at once. That's kind of like my socks and my hat right now, but that's because I'm doing the hat because I only can do certain sections of the pattern for the socks until I'm done with the sock class. Like we're doing it, you know, in sections kind of. So I can't just like go through the whole pattern myself. Or I mean, I could, but I'm in a class for a reason. So, but generally speaking, I want to stay a little bit more monogamous with my knitting. But also the more important thing is a lot of people have these giant yarn stashes. And I know that I will get to a point where I have like different yarns because you don't use all of the yarn up in a project or whatever. But a lot of people will buy just like tons and tons and tons of yarn. And I do not want to do that. I also find it really overwhelming. That's like, how are you buying yarn and then not knowing what you're going to make with it? I know some people might think that that's very fun, but like I already collect books like and have books that I need to read. I don't need to be having a bunch of yarn around like that. So I'm hoping to not get to that place. But I'm still not sure how to store WIPs, which is works in progress. Right now I just have everything in my little tote bag, but like that's not going to last very long because I have like needles and some like notions and so, like the yarn that I have, and I have to keep it away from my cats because they're so far fine with me knitting and they're not like going for it, but one of my cats will eat like string and stuff, so I'm keeping it away from him, so I'm like hanging it up, but I can't do everything in a bag like this all the time. So I've been watching a lot of knitting videos. I will not refer to them as podcasts, talking about like knitting organization, but they're mostly talking about these like gigantic collections and how they store like all of their yarn and all of their needles, and they have every single needle from like multiple different places, and I do not have that yet. So if you have any ideas, what I'm thinking of is actually getting one of those like kind of like this sized boxes that have the locking tops and putting my stuff in there, but I also want it kind of like easily accessible. So I don't know, I'm still kind of figuring that out. The other thing is I do not know how to hold my yarn nice. Like I want to kind of like show you. So like I'm knitting English style, which that's another thing is there's a lot of people's opinions about like the right way to knit and knitting fast and whatever. I tried it continental a little bit. I don't really like it. So I'm doing English, but I'm just kind of like, when I knit, I, you know, like boop, 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 and do this and through, right? That is not a super efficient way to knit at all. But when I try to like do this and kind of like hold my yarn like this with my finger, that's not working. It doesn't, like, I can't even get close enough to like throw. It's like this whole thing. So I have yet to figure out how to do that because most videos are like how to knit faster, and they like start from someone resting the yarn on one of their fingers, like on their pointer finger especially, and they're like, and here's how you switch that up to like flick or whatever, which is a kind of way to knit English style. And I'm like, I'm not even there yet, babes. So yeah, I'm trying to find like videos on how to like hold yarn, because obviously people that knit faster have this like way that they're holding the yarn, but in a way that's still comfortable for them, obviously. And that way, when I try to do it, is not comfortable and not efficient at all. So yeah, that's a thing I want to learn as well, because I don't want to get too stuck in this like really slow way of knitting, which I think is also probably not that great for tension and stuff too. Tension is like how tight you are like knitting and stuff. So yeah, I need to fix that before it gets too ingrained, but I can't yet. So yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about, is that I am knitting. Here's my thoughts thus far about knitting. I will probably like do videos here and there about knitting, but I'm not going to turn this into like a knitting channel by any means. But I will probably talk about like finished objects and things like that, like halfway through the year or like end of next year or whatever. But yeah, those are my thoughts on knitting. So my more spicy thoughts about knitting will be posted down below if you want to go check that link out, because I don't want to post it publicly because the knitting community, some of them are mean. I'm just going to say that. Some of them are mean, and you'll hear more about that in that video. Comment below. Let me know your knitting thoughts. Thank you all for watching. I'll see all you guys soon. Bye.